Today's sponsor of the Vision Quest podcast is 920 Hat Company. Leather patch hats are in, and 920 Hat Company is here to hook you up with your very own custom hat. All patches are lasered on top-grade genuine leather and on popular brand hats like Richardson and FlexFit. Whether you're looking to show off your business or want a one-of-a-kind hat for yourself, 920 Hat Company can do it all. All the hats are handcrafted right in the Fox Valley, but worn across America. With over 500 hats in stock, they guarantee fast turnaround times. Honestly, Liam, looking at these hats, solid, right?
Yeah, they're pretty. I like them.
I like that patch itself.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, one-of-a-kind stuff. I know his name's Trevor. He does great work. He's actually gotten I think we got a knit hat coming.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, we got that coming. So we're really excited to have these guys on board as a sponsor. So get down to check them out on Facebook. I believe they're on Instagram. Check them out, man. They got the best hats, I think, in the Fox Valley, if not in the state.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. So get down to 920 Hat Company on social media and check them out. And we are live. We are ago again. I would say, I don't know what, 10 hours after I hung up with Pat Lugo. But we're ready to rock, man. We are here joined by none other than to me, you're kind of the reason why I kind of did this as far as the wrestling thing and getting into this. But we're joined by Justin Basch of Baschamania. I pronounced it with the A this time.
Man, giving me too much credit and pronouncing it right. You're getting all the points, man.
Let's go. So I kind of explained it to you a little bit. Obviously I've had wrestlers on, but you're a big part of the wrestling community, man. I mean, the things that you do, the guys you talk to, I mean, it's all wrestling. So I figured it would be the time, kind of like I do with the local guys here, Teak, Fenwick, and Steve, and talk to you a little bit about what brought you to the scene and where you're from and what drove you to this. Obviously, you have a separate business with is that Basch Media? So
Basch Solutions is my main 16-year running now company.
Nice. Okay. So let's talk about where you kind of started from. Where are you from?
From Rochester, New York, which some like to just say is southern Canada, because you get the cold and the gloom of Lake Ontario in Canada. If I pan my camera to the left right now, you would just see another rainy, gloomy morning. I mean, at least you were saying we got like 10 inches of snow coming from your way.
Yeah.
So, misery does love company. I'm glad if it's not beautiful here, like the whole Northeast is just a shadow of a cloud right now. But yeah, Rochester, New York, I'm from. Spencerport, New York is where I went to high school.
Nice. Okay.
Kinda
Okay. So
fell in love with wrestling.
with kind of where you're from, and obviously the New York area, where you and I talked a little bit about sports. I mean, obviously you were in sports kind of growing up, just like every kid. Was there, when you're kind of in sports, were you like, I'm going to do this? What was your main sport as you were a kid growing up?
Man, I didn't really have too many sports through like elementary school. And when I got to middle school, I just had like an itch to do something. And I actually did modified volleyball. And that was kind of
Really?
boring. Yeah. It just random. Like the first day of school, somebody was going to volleyball practice. I'm like, I'll go do that. I got nothing to do after school. And then did that first year, and then wasn't that great. And then a friend I had met was going to go to wrestling practice, and I grew up a huge WWE fan.
Oh, boy.
So I'm like, wrestling? All right, let's go power bomb and do this and that. And my gym teacher in middle school was Bill Jacato, who's a legendary coach here in New York. And he's one of the greatest humans I know. And he kept telling me, he's like, you should come wrestle. You should come wrestle. So I'm like, all right, that heck else do I have to do? So started wrestling and, wrestled for the next 6 years. And that was kind of the only sport I did.
Okay.
Thankfully, because I wasn't that great. So I only really failed at one sport.
I wasn't either. I was not good. It sucked. In fact, I tell this story once in a while, but I remember when I was, I think it was a sophomore, and we were going to a tournament. I knew I wasn't going to do good anyways. I was always getting my butt kicked up. For food, I brought along a 6-pack of beer. Yeah, kids, don't take that advice. That was a horrible decision. And my coach caught wind of it, and he brought me over. Coach Bill England. He's another great dude. His son actually was a coach in town here too. But he's like, "Hey, what'd you bring for food today? Did you bring any kind of snacks along?" I was like, "Oh, just some stuff and something to eat on." And he's like, "Yeah, let me see what you brought." And I was like, "Oh no!" He found out, and I opened. He's like, "Yeah, you're not wrestling today. We're gonna talk when we get back."
Oh boy,
my dedication was not where the kids are nowadays. That's for sure.
Oh, it's crazy. I didn't really work out too much. Like I just went to practice and wrestled. And when there was a tournament, I went to it.
Yep.
And, it's like looking back, I realized why, for not being as committed as wrestlers often are, I'd say I was good in that realm.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's crazy if I could go back, what I would do differently, knowing,
right.
knowing what I know now, obviously.
So as you're kind of going through, getting through school and stuff, what were your interests as you were kind of growing up, like especially in high school when you start to kind of make up your own mind about things?
Yeah, my big thing was I was just enthralled, if that's the right word, with computers.
Okay.
So, early on, thankfully there was a computer in my house, and I was on Juno and Frontier Net, for those who remember that, and just trying to use dial-up internet any way I can. And I actually, at one point, I think like domain names were free for a while, and I had gotten jjb.net, and it was just this neon blue website with neon green text, and kind of taught myself a lot about websites. And it's the same thing back then, where you can right click on any website and go to view page source, and you can, see what it is. A lot more complicated now. Back then, it was very simple. This means bold text. This means that. So throughout high school, I was actually running some pro wrestling news and rumors websites.
So you were already in the mix, man, like doing that.
Yeah. Wow. So I was on there's websites we built like wrestlemagazine.com. And, if there's any old wrestling news people, like even fans, like that 2000, 2001, 2002 era, even 99 of like pro wrestling news, that's what I was doing. Like I would skip class and go to the library, get on the internet, and I would start like writing news articles for, pro wrestling. Hey, rumor is this guy showed up at the airport. He's going to be at Raw tonight, this and that. And
wow.
I did that all through high school. So websites was kind of my thing.
Yeah.
And, obviously there was that tie between pro wrestling and amateur wrestling. That was kind of the fun back and forth. But yeah, websites and business was kind of an early interest.
So you started even with amateur wrestling as well. You were doing a little bit here and there, dabbling, I guess you would say.
Yeah, because there was a Section 5 website called armdrag.com. Shout out Tim Herman.
Yeah.
And he let me there was events that I wasn't even on the lineup and I wanted to like do stuff. So I'm like, I'll just write an article about this and like cover it.
Yeah.
And so I wrote some articles in high school for armdrag.com. And back then there was no social media. I mean, you're talking 2001 and 2004 when I was in high school.
Yeah.
So that's like, I tell the story often. I got a pair. These were a pair of wrestling shoes I had in high school.
Oh, nice.
And they were Kale's shoes.
Kale's, yeah.
I had no clue who he was at the time.
Right.
I just went to Dick's and bought shoes, and they happened to be his.
Yeah.
And when I started working with him, I found these after, and I'd send him a picture. I'm like, I guess I was supporting you before I even knew it.
Yeah.
Because in high school, like, there was no really following these guys like there is now. We have, podcasts like yours, like mine, and you get to know these athletes. Back then, it was nothing.
Yeah.
So Section 5, arm drag was a nice resource where you could see, back then it was like Gregor Gillespie and Troy Nickerson and other New York kids who were incredible. And you could go on see the results and the rankings and this and that, because there's nothing like there is today back then.
Absolutely not. And that was kind of the thing that, especially with soccer, because that was my gig, was running around fields and kicking balls. And there was none of that. I mean, you got your magazine. Yep. I know we had Score magazine, and then there was soccer, I think it was Soccer Digest or whatever, but otherwise, like, my brother and I had to go like buy VHS tapes to go watch guys. We didn't have even internet at the time, not until what was that, 96 or something, 95 when
mid to late 90s. And even then there was nothing on the internet that was really worthwhile.
Not at all.
I mean, the old designs of what a website used to look like then. And I think that's why being able to learn it at an early age, it's like you could build the website very, very quick because there wasn't much to it. It was very simplistic back then.
So was that coding that you were dealing with then? Is that coding? Because I didn't know websites until all this internet stuff became bigger.
Yeah, it was a mix. Initially, like very early on, it was very easy to develop a website. So, I would code them, design them, kind of do everything.
Wow.
Then it quickly evolved into more so of managing them.
Yeah.
And, you're talking the pro wrestling websites, and there's other websites. A buddy of mine down in Florida, Mike Farron, we kind of met through working on a mutual wrestling news website back in like 2000. We still work together today.
Nice.
My CTO at Basch Solutions, Kevin Resendez, same thing. We worked on a website together back in like 2000, 2001.
Yeah.
And so as it quickly evolved, people kind of did their own thing, like what they specialized in. And I didn't code for very long. I'd say, 101 back then would get you to a full website. 101 nowadays barely gets you to edit the content on a page because there's so much to do. So I stopped coding pretty quickly and just managed the projects and ran the websites into that kind of stuff.
So you're like a vet, man. Like you've been steeped in it for quite some time. So because
sadly, I mean, I think I've been doing this for 25 years, and it's like, my gosh, how old am I?
Yeah. Well, and I sit back and kind of look at, like either you or even Willie, too, like, you guys connections. And that's the biggest thing too, that I think with a lot of this, especially for me, the connections that you get to make, and the people that you get to meet and the personalities, and everybody's pretty genuine. Everybody that I hop on with is always kind of, I always tell them, I'm not here to dig into dirt. I'm not here to spread stories, things like that. I'm here to just talk about you. And they open up pretty well. And so, I mean, seeing the guys that you've been able to talk to, and obviously the business that you have deals with those guys as well. So how did you, being that you were already kind of into the amateur wrestling thing, did that just come naturally? Was that just like, hey man, I really love this computer stuff? And
no, it's almost the opposite. It's funny how God works things full circle, because all through high school, built websites. My buddy Mike Farron and Kevin, we were all kind of working on websites, and then we all graduated around the same time. And Kevin's in Boston, Mike's in Florida. Once I graduated high school, I kind of like walked away. I moved out of my house, and I didn't even own a computer for a while.
Wow.
And I worked at Wegmans Warehouse. I worked at Burger King. I did driveway sealing. I did everything for a couple of years.
Nice.
And then my buddy Mike in like 2006 reached back out to me. We hadn't talked in a couple of years. And he's like, dude, everything we were doing back then, like we should do for businesses. Like we're so far ahead of what people are doing. Mm-hmm. So we started like working together more and more. And I slowly got back into it. And in 2008, I finally launched Basch Solutions because so many people were like, hey, I see what you're doing here. Like, can you help me with my electric surplus company? Can you help me with this? I'm like, okay. Wow. So I started the company, and then I want to say so I started the company like the summer of 2008. And then in March of 2009, I'm watching NCAAs. It's like, once you wrestled, there's this affinity with watching NCAAs. If you do nothing else, if you went to a practice, you're probably watching NCAAs. Mm-hmm. And that was my extent at the time of following wrestling. And I had reached out blindly to Cal Sanderson and said, I was watching NCAAs, and that was the first time I was learning of who he was. Yeah. And they're saying, this 4-time undefeated champ. And I'm like, man, this guy could have a monster brand potential. And I went to his website. It sucked. Yeah. And I'm like, dude, I think I could really help elevate your brand. I'm sure you don't necessarily need my help. And this is a blind email. Yep. But, I went on. I gave him this whole thing. I said, I'll even build your website for free. I really don't care. I'm like, I think we could do a lot of great stuff together. Yeah. He ended up reaching out a month later and was like, I'm in. Like, this sounds cool. This, I like your ideas. And so we built his website. Starting then, I started following wrestling because now I'm a Cal Sanderson guy. He's a client of mine. Of course. And so I started following him. And then a couple years later, he asked me if I would help Varner. Varner was getting ready to go make an Olympic run. I said, yeah, let's do it. So I worked with Varner. And then Cal moved to State College. And that was cool because here's a client. Varner's moving shortly. And I went down to State College. And, that's why I'm a Penn State fan, is Cal made me almost feel like I was an honorary alumni.
That's like pretty cool.
Yeah. He basically had me stand up in front of everybody. He's like, hey, guys, this is Justin Basch. He owns Basch Solutions. He helps me with my website. He helps me with this and that. And everybody in the room was very welcoming and, open to it. And so I started following wrestling then more and more. And then, me and Burroughs linked up on Twitter, started working with him. And when you got Cal, Varner, and Burroughs as clients, that's kind of like catapults you to the top of the wrestling world as far as like, who is this guy? And then I started working with USA Wrestling on Save the Olympics or Keep Wrestling Olympics, all that.
Okay.
So I tell all that because that's kind of how I got back into wrestling, where now I'm working with these guys. I'm following them. I'm following what Cal's doing. I'm following Varner, Burroughs in the senior level. Then it was, David Taylor and these other guys. And I want to say it was like 2018. Podcasts were really starting to come about. 2018, 2019. And
thank you, Joe Rogan.
Yeah. And being an entrepreneur, I kept telling him, like, you should podcast. And a buddy of mine, Billy, we teamed up and did a faith and political podcast because that's what he does. Yeah. And he was struggling. He had so much on his plate. We were struggling to actually get episodes out. And I'm like, dude, I want to go full bore with this. So I said, well, I'm just going to try my own thing for a little bit. And I started Baschamania. And initially, it was just going to be my clients. I work with a lot of interesting non-wrestling clients, athletes like Carly Lloyd, who's Olympic gold medalist, World Cup winner, Player of the Year, all that. Actors like Kevin Sorbo, who played Hercules, nice. Jim Miller, UFC fighter. So I started having like the early episodes, a couple of them were guys like Kevin Sorbo, Jim Miller, non-wrestlers. Yeah. But then it started to be a thing where it's like, I think one of my first episodes had Bo Nickel.
That was number 2. Yep.
Yeah.
Bo Nickel's number 2.
All of a sudden it quickly became into a thing like, you know what? I have all these connections in wrestling and I enjoy the conversations I have so much. And being like in the room, I think people would be floored at how humble a lot of these guys are and just having a conversation. Yeah. And, if you wrestled, that like the 20 minutes before practice, the 20 minutes after practice, just kind of hanging out in the room, like that type of fellowship, you have such great camaraderie, such great fellowship and conversations. And that's what I'm like, this would be pretty cool. Like Bo and I have had 100 conversations, going to get breakfast in the room, whatever. It'd be cool to have them on the podcast, have that publicly, and give these guys a platform to talk about their faith, to talk about what they're doing. So, it was kind of funny that, I was in wrestling, got out of it. I kind of roped back in through having clients that were the best of the best. And then the podcast, I never intended to start a wrestling podcast. Obviously, Baschamania is a play on Hulkamania, which is,
right.
more adage to my childhood wrestling fandom. But it's funny how it was one of those things where just, let's have clients on. Okay, another wrestling client. And I think like episode 10 or something, I'm like, okay, this is a wrestling podcast. We might have non-wrestling guests on at some point, but this is a wrestling podcast at this point.
Yep. Yeah. And, some of the episodes I've listened to, even with, because like you said, you've had non-wrestling guys. I mean, those are still good. It was the same type of conversation as well. It's not like you change the dynamic of it at all. And it's kind of the same with me, like the Vision Quest, like the movie. I mean, I watched it growing up thousands of times. Nick Sirianno, his dad made him watch it 3 times a day. That's when he was a kid. And that's why those things kind of pop up. But I agree. I think it gives these guys an opportunity. Plus, I mean, hey, you're getting to talk to some pretty high level athletes and just getting an insight on those guys without the noise of and not to knock flow, but looking for like the crazy story to talk behind. It's about those guys, and they live enough with what they're doing. And I got the kind of the same thing. That's kind of why I wanted to do this, is just to expose these guys for the truth, of who they are, and just have conversations about where they came from and how they're, how they decided to do what they're doing. Cause this is a long road, some of these guys, as far as 20, 25 years of competition, and I can't attest to it because I was not that good. But when you started working with these guys though, top level, and you started kind of getting some traction, I mean, were you ever thinking that I don't even want to do this other stuff, I just want a podcast? Did you ever think you wanted to try to get paid? Like heavily to just do podcasting? No,
because I enjoy podcasting, but part of why I like it so much is I have guys on, and there's a part of the podcast that is very selfish. If nobody listened to the podcast, I would still do it. And I try to tell business owners that all the time. It's like, selfishly, it's a great way to meet people. If I text Levi Haynes, who I've never really talked to, and be like, hey, you want to come on the podcast? And we talk for an hour. That's a great introduction and a great way to meet somebody. And there's a lot of guys who came on the podcast initially, like Roman Bravo Young, like Nick Lee, who we then kept in touch and they became clients. And it's fun because it's like, the podcast is great, but I love helping these kids grow their brands. Totally. I love helping them, build websites and get the word out. And, we're in such a diverse place of how people can monetize their brand, especially with NIL. So I think if you took that part away from the podcast, I wouldn't enjoy it nearly as much.
Sure.
Because there's an aspect of, Basch Solutions being able to work with wrestlers, and even people that listen to my podcast that own businesses, they reach out. Hey, I own a construction company. Hey, I own a finance company. Can you help us? Like, we want to work with other wrestlers. We want to work with other wrestling people. So I think the Basch Solutions aspect keeps it so fun for me, where it's like, I never wanted to be an on-camera person. Never. I always like being behind the scenes, but I preached so much to business owners. Like, my buddy was a chiropractor. Like, dude, you should have a health podcast and have other doctors on, and have other people in health. My buddy who's a local contractor, like, have other contractors on, start a podcast, because I think it's so fruitful for your business. And at the same time, like, while it is selfish for me to grow those relationships, it is also covering the sport. It is also getting stories out there. One of my favorite things that have happened since the podcast is when I had Mark Hall on, I asked him about like his favorite matches and some different questions. And Brandon Slade called me the next day and he's like, hey, I just want you to know how much I love that episode with Mark Hall. I'm like, well, first of all, I didn't realize you even listened to the podcast. So, thank you.
Thank you.
And then he said it meant a lot because when Mark was talking about one of his favorite matches ever, I think it was when he won the Junior World Championship against the Iranian and Slay was in his corner. So that meant a lot for Slay to hear that. Yeah. And that's just something that he never got the opportunity to hear Mark talk about because nobody's asked Mark that question. And for a lot of these guys, there's a lot of guys who don't get to talk about their faith often. And when they get that out there and they get that opportunity to talk about it, there's some guys that I think are going to want to talk about it, and I bring it up and they kind of just like don't want to talk about it. I'm like, okay, that's cool, but I'm glad I gave you that opportunity. So there's both a selfish aspect to podcasting that I also think the selfless part of, we were talking beforehand about, there's potentially money in podcasting, but it's also just a lot of like throwing money away and kind of just hoping you get a return out of it, whether it's just helping people, whether it's whatever. Yeah. So there's that aspect that, Basch Solutions kind of funds this podcast because of the nature that it does bring in clients and it does help. But yeah, I think it's a nice 1-2 punch having them in tandem.
Yeah, for sure. And I love the part that I love, like I had Gary Mayab on. That was like a 2.5 hour conversation. And that was one of my first ones. But you get stories from these guys too, that, you get a second if you breeze by some of these guys at a tournament, you kind of get a question or two and then you're on your way. Right. Well, these guys get to tell a story that you may not have otherwise heard. I shed tears with Gary Mayab on the episode. There's some pretty sad stuff. You get emotional because you're hearing some of these things from these guys that are their life situations that, again, it's selfish. You get to hear it, but then you also get to give it to the people. And that's kind of, the big reason why I do it too, is just it's a selfish thing to be able to have the access to those guys and talk to them and be able to have that insight. But at the same time though, too, I feel that I need to take that selfishness and turn it into selflessness and give it to others. And again, I do this for free, man. I don't charge a dime for anything. I think I just ask for a couple of donations. I just do it because I love doing it, and that's the biggest thing, and so I know there were some questions because there's some pretty big stories that are out there right now as far as in the wrestling world, talking about like JB and Starachi and that whole beef going on back and forth. When this goes on, so that it was kind of interesting. I was thinking about it a little bit. When this goes on, because some of these guys are your clients, right? I know you're a businessman. You're not dumb. You're not just going to be out there spouting, things like that. But where are we as a community when something like that is said or done, like what JB said? And then I know Bo is kind of on the tip of UFC and trying to make his name known. And what are your thoughts on the whole kind of smack talking situation when it comes to wrestling versus UFC?
Yeah, it's interesting because there's an aspect of promotion that I think lacks in wrestling. And I think we're starting to see it more and more where we are building up characters and personalities within wrestling. I think you're seeing it with Carter Starachi a lot because he almost plays this villain, on social media. He's one of the nicest dudes you can talk to. Right. He'll randomly text me to ask how I'm doing, how the family's doing. Like, he is such a genuinely good dude. Yeah. And it's very hard you almost have to take a lot of what you see publicly with a grain of salt, and you kind of have to almost ask yourself, like, even if I don't know the answer, is there a level of this just being promotion? And there's a lot of fans that don't care. They just want it. You don't know is Bo saying that because he has a fight coming up and he just wants to get an opinion out there. You don't know these things. And I don't like when my guys go back and forth. Like, Jordan has been at my wedding. I've been at his wedding. Yeah. Bo's my guy. I've driven to State College just to have breakfast with him. So I saw a couple people actually were tweeting me like, hey, you really got to do a show and talk about this. I said, listen, I ain't touching their beef with a 10-foot pole. I'm like, when if you're in a family and your brothers are fighting, number one, you don't pick sides.
Right.
Number two, your true intent is my brain goes to, can I get Jordan and Bo both on the podcast to squash the beef? Like, that's where my brain goes.
Sure. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, right.
And I honestly think Carter's kind of like a byproduct of this. He's almost like friendly fire, crossfire, whatever, because, he's just like, all good, whatever. I'm going to wrestle him in a couple weeks. And, I think overall, I like the banter. Mm-hmm. I think you got to have good guys. You got to have bad guys. There's this notion that, I think wrestlers sometimes get more credibility than they deserve as far as like, there are a lot of good humans in wrestling. There's also some bad ones. There's good guys and bad guys in everything.
Yep.
And I think sometimes when you don't see a personality, you just assume they're a good guy or whatever. But I think letting people have the character, whether it's good or bad, and there are some that are definitely playing the villain, some that are definitely playing the good guy. But I do think wrestling could benefit more so from that MMA style of banter, where I posted before NCAAs, before the finals, Carter posted something and Rocco Welsh posted something. I just tweeted them both side by side and said, 7 p.m. Saturday night, you don't want to miss this. And it got crazy engagement. People want to see that. Here's a true freshman talking his talk. Here's the 3-time national champ on one leg going for his number 4.
Right.
And they want to kill each other. Let's watch what happens now.
Yeah. Yep.
So I think you need that. There's so much room in the sport for promoting it as far as a storyline. And it's very hard when we don't know often who's going to meet. I know Willie and I are doing an Olympic trials preview next week. And it's like, you don't know who the finals are going to be, or it'd be almost a completely different show.
Yeah.
Does somebody like a young guy like O'Toole or Messenbring go on a run and make the finals? How does Burroughs play out? Is it Burroughs Dake? So
again,
it's very tough to build the storylines. And I think the more banter we can get, the more I do think that helps the hype and the promotion and let people kind of pick their sides and go from there.
I agree. I think just because my standpoint is, and I have a 15-year-old, right? And I'm not the guy that doesn't say that you can't be doing it. Here's my thought on it. I love the banter live when these guys are wrestling each other. I love the back and forth that a coach might have, because we talk a lot about, especially in amateur wrestling, we talk about respect and we talk about sportsmanship. And I used to get mad at Ben Askren a lot because he was running a youth club, but then he's out in the UFC talking, smack to everybody. And it's like, you got kids watching you, man. Like, what's going on? You're running a youth club. And I wasn't I didn't watch UFC. I'm not a UFC crazy kind of guy. I kind of watch it once in a while and I get into the characters, but then I kind of understood, okay, I see what he's doing. I get it. But then we also lose the faith of parents of actually parenting their kids properly and teaching them, hey, somewhere down the road, this will be okay. But right now we're kids. We need to learn this kind of stuff. And I get lost in the fact of that we're constantly trying to teach kids sportsmanship. And then, and like you said, like the two tweets beside each other, I'm game with that. But like, it was hard listening to Bo talk smack about JB like that, because it's like, number one, JB is never going to have an opportunity to write that with Bo unless there's like some special event where those guys can, bang it out with each other. But it's like, he's not even going to be able to do anything. Like, it's like, so now you're actually upset about something.
Yeah.
And now he had a place to put it out. Right. And I respect that, the opinion, but to me, it's like these guys, our kids grew up watching them. And now Bo's another one of those guys that's kind of like sitting there talking smack. It's like, man, and I can't buy it from him because he seemed so nice before in college. Mm-hmm. So it's hard to hear that coming back. So that's kind of where I get kind of conflicted with a lot of it. It is exciting and it adds another element, but at the same time too, are we crossing information for all the kids coming up? I love the mat side stuff.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that, my kids are young. I got a 2-year-old and a little girl is going to turn 1 next month. So I haven't hit that parenting standpoint of, teaching them right versus wrong from a standpoint of what they see. But my gut reaction is we already see that in all sports, whether your kids are watching football, whether they're watching baseball, You're going to have good guys. You're going to have bad guys.
True.
And I think the athletes have to, number one, I think there should be, somebody was texting me about, I love Bo. I can't believe he said that. And I said, if that's the case, I'm like, and he says one thing that you don't agree with in 7 years.
Yeah.
I'm like, there's an aspect of grace and saying, you know what? I don't agree with this, but maybe X, maybe Y. And, I think with athletes, there's sometimes anybody in the spotlight is hard to hold to a standard where it's like, hey, you can look up to this person. As a Christian, my kids should look up to Jesus above everybody else and say, that's your role model. I think you have athletes that you can look up to, but it's tough because no matter what you do, there are going to be athletes that just, even if they're 99%, that 1%, we're all human. We're all going to fail.
Sure. Yeah.
So it's one of those things where it's like, I think wrestling is behind the other sports where it's like, I don't like Patrick Mahomes. I hate his guts from a fan standpoint. I'm a Buffalo Bills guy, but he hasn't done too much wrong in football until the Bills game this year when he was yelling at the ref and pouting. Yeah. And a lot of people were like, oh, Patrick Mahomes isn't a good guy. It's like, well, if you were playing sports in front of the public eye for 10 years and you finally had a moment where you're like, hey, you acted out of line, it's going to happen. I don't know that I would tell my kids like, hey, Patrick Mahomes yelled at the ref. You're no longer a fan of Patrick Mahomes. Or Bo called Jordan Burroughs a fraud. You're not, you know what I mean? It's like,
yeah.
I think there's an aspect of just realism, but we're not used to it in wrestling. And I think that's where the disconnect you're mentioning kind of comes from. It's like, we're used to these guys having so much respect for each other that all of a sudden somebody has an opinion.
Yeah.
And
that's true.
It's almost like, it gets, I don't want to say it's something out of nothing, but it does have that vibe where it's like you have guys that disagree and we're like, ooh, I love Jordan. I love Bo. I don't really like this.
Who do I pick? Right. You don't have to pick anyone really. So, and that in the same point too, because you made a good point about the other sports doing it, because I just got done defending Caitlin Clark, right, with the whole FU thing or whatever, stand up or thing, kind of whatever she did on the court, and I'm defending her, and I'm thinking like, this sport kind of needs it. And she was at home. She wasn't telling anybody to shut the F up. She was telling them to stand up. And I was like, why would you tell her home base to shut up? But so I watched some other games with her, and I was like, holy cow, these guys got me watching women's college basketball. Holy cow. Okay. So now it's kind of like, I don't, again, it was one of those things where a snap kind of reaction with the Bo Nickel thing. And I kind of was like, maybe I got to kind of back up. I'm a Hawkeye fan. Okay. It's just the way I've been since I was 5, and Penn State friends of mine can throw it in my face now for 10 years, 20 years.
Hey, you guys still have a legacy. There's nothing to be upset about.
Nah, right. And it helps. Again, it's another storyline that helps the sport. But I never, ever got to a point where I would say, like, because I mean, hey, if Liam wants to go to Penn State, I'm a fan of wherever he goes. I don't even care what it is. He could go to Grand Canyon State. I don't care. I'm a big fan. And he's going to have guys that are in his team. They're going to, just right now in high school, there's certain guys that do certain things you don't agree with. I think you make a good point about just kind of, hey, everybody's human. They have a reaction to things, and they have feelings and emotions. They have to let them out. And that's what I said about Caitlin Clark. Like, these guys are high level athletes that are doing things that people see, and not every single moment's going to be the best moment.
And I think, most people in the sport look up to both Bo and look up to Jordan. So Correct. If there's beef, it's kind of one of those things where it's like, I feel like the general reaction was, hey, Bo overreacted. And if that's your stance, it's like, okay. Great. If that's the anomaly, and, whatever.
Right?
Yeah.
So moving on to I think there's a lot of flack, and we'll make this quick because I know you got to get going, but the thing that I kind of question, because I don't know every intricate detail that goes on with NCAA rules, things like that. I'm not I'm not as well versed as you guys are. I'm working on it. I think I'm building.
Hey, I don't know the rules at all. That's why I have Willie on the podcast. I can just defer to him, the brain, and be like, all right, Willie, tell me here. And I'll text him screenshots. I'll take a screenshot and send it to him. Be like, before I tweet something, sometimes I'm like, am I really wrong on this take? Right. And he'll be like, you're an idiot. Or no, post it. So sometimes I still defer to him.
for all that
I say
stuff.
Something.
Yeah. So the date and fix thing with these guys, a lot of guys got lucky because of COVID, right? I mean, they got an extra year out of it. So I think I was a little mixed on it, but I sat in my car the other day and thought about it. I was like, you know what? If I had another opportunity and I felt like I was good enough to keep rolling, I would probably go too. Like, I'm an athlete,
I don't blame the kids at all. I hate that. I think it is asinine that the NCAA gave him an extra year. Asinine.
Sure.
I think the fact that you have Vincenzo Joseph, who I'm obviously biased to, he's a co-host of mine, he's a good friend.
Yeah.
Vincenzo Joseph was in the NCAA finals 3 times, and he won twice, and he was arguably a shoo-in for the 4th NCAA championships to at least make the finals. He got robbed of that, and he never got an extra opportunity. But here comes along some kid who starts in 2021, wrestles 4 years, and gets a 5th year when he never had the NCAA championships taken away. It's an asinine decision by the NCAA.
Yeah.
But if I'm a kid and you want to have a shot, I don't fault any of these kids. If anything, I think they're crazy for wanting to stay in school one more year.
Yeah.
I couldn't last in college 3 months before I dropped out.
I think
so if anything, I'm like, Willie and I were talking about Bo Bartlett. Will he come back? And I'm like, my conversations with Bo is that he really doesn't want to do school for another year. I'm like, if you're runner-up in the NCAAs, does that incentivize you to maybe deal with school for another year to have one more shot? Sure. Would I blame Bo for coming back one more year? Absolutely not at all. Caitlin Clark, in my opinion, has more upside playing college for one more year than going to the WNBA. I had that Iowa LSU game on. My wife goes, you don't watch basketball. What are you doing? And I go, you have to watch this Caitlin Clark versus Angel Reese rematch. I'm like, you have to. And it was electric. The game was electric. I don't know that people are tuning in to a WNBA match like they are college basketball. So there is upside. And I think as these guys build your brand, if you're Dayton Fix and you have the opportunity to leverage the college audience, the college fan base, the Oklahoma State program, I do not blame him one bit for wanting another year. Where I think is crazy is the NCAA giving it to them, but I don't fault these kids at all for saying, hey, you're going to give me one more shot to accomplish my dreams. I'm taking it. But I also understand the kids who want to move on. Everybody's asking, will Carter come back for another year? And it's like, I don't blame Carter because he's the only kid who could ever become a 5-time champ. Mm-hmm. Okay, understood. But kids do not grow up dreaming about becoming a 5-time NCAA champ. They dream of being a 4-time NCAA champ. And if you're one of these Penn State kids and your coach did it and you say, my coach was a 4-time champ, I want to be a 4-time champ, and he goes and accomplishes that dream, I'm not surprised if he doesn't come back for another year. But I do get leveraging, especially in wrestling, the college audience is bigger than any other audience in the sport. It's just,
I agree.
You have Penn State fans that only care about watching college wrestling. You have Iowa, you have Oklahoma State, you have all these programs that only care about what their program does because they're alumni, because they're fans. Yeah, wrestling's had a hard time of converting a casual fan, which in my opinion is a college wrestling fan that just tunes in because they're an Oklahoma State guy. They watch Oklahoma State football, Oklahoma State wrestling, they wrestled, whatever. Yeah. Converting that to, following the Yasardo Goo in Turkey at 2 a.m. for a prelim match is a very hard transition from NCAAs on Saturday night with 20,000 people in the arena on ESPN prime time. You can watch with your kids after dinner versus, I got Jordan's wife, Lauren, great. The whole family is family friends. And, she's knows that I pay attention to everything. She's like, hey, have you seen the stream link for Jordan competing in the Yasardo Goo? Nope. Yeah. It's like, so here we have even spouses of competitors trying to follow it and saying, I don't see a stream link. Do you? Like, so I think it's very hard. So if these kids want to stick around for one more year and leverage that audience and build their brand, go for it. I don't blame them. But I do think the NCAA is asinine for giving them the year to begin with. Give the kids who lost a year another year. Totally.
Correct. And I was just going to bring that up. I mean, you could have done it where it's like, hey, the kids that are going to be done and they didn't get that chance to compete, you can siphon through that and make sure that they get that year to be able to do it, kind of thing, you know?
Right. But the kids who lost their senior year at NCAA that's who it's like.
Let them bring it on back. You can even make some special rules where they only have to compete so many times because now they got to go back to class again, you know?
And right. And I mean, if Carter Starachi didn't wrestle in 2020, he was a redshirt freshman. So it wasn't one of his official years. His first year was 2021. But you have other kids who literally, let's say you did not redshirt. Let's say you just came in and 2021 happened to be your first year. You literally get 5 chances. And the kids who graduated in 2020 got 3. It's just like, what?
What is going on?
But this is finally the last year. Because this is the last year of this COVID eligibility where starting in 2022, you know, Dean Hamady, these other kids are, you know, don't get that extra year, which I think is good for the sport.
Yeah, I agree. So, you know, I want to wrap it up with you here because you got stuff going on. And what I want to do is I'd love to have you back on again. I'd love to be able to kind of podcast with you. I know that you have a busy schedule, and please, Penn State fans, just because I'm an Iowa fan, please don't hate me. It's okay. It's all right.
Listen,
There's some heavy dudes.
It's only the extreme fans because I get being a Penn State guy, and I even told a story today. Like, I'm a Penn State guy because I was a Cal guy. He went to Penn State. I didn't go to college, and so that's where the fandom comes in. But I have had Spencer Lee, Alex Marinelli, Kemmerer. I've had them on the podcast. I'll have anybody on the podcast that I think has a great story.
That's right.
I'm like, I think wrestling and sports in general needs more podcasts that have a bias. I don't know if you tune into Barstool Sports at all, but one of the biggest sporting media companies in the world, and you have the owner, a monster Boston sports guy. Dan Katz, Big Cat, a monster Chicago sports guy.
Yep.
You have people who have these biases, and it's what makes it so fun. When they have like these takes that are either so high above high because they won or low upon low, and it's entertainment. And I think the more we have guys who, you know, I think we're starting to see it now where, you know, Zach Bogle, Stalemates, Iowa State fan, has that bias. Yep. Me, I'm a Penn State guy. I have that bias. I think the more you have this, the better. Let people tune in and have that bias where you have an edge, whether it's for your guest, whether it's for your take. People love crucifying me if I take a Penn State guy and it's a bad pick. You know, it's like, but that's what makes it fun. It's like you're not going to agree with everybody you listen to sports takes from. I think that's what makes sports great.
Yeah. And I'm not afraid of any kind of criticism. I mean, man, I've been called dumb, all kinds. I can imagine you've had your own thrown your way.
Oh yeah.
As far as all kinds of crap, but I love the banter and I love the talk. And I especially love the fact when podcasters can kind of get together because a lot of times we're doing our shows with guys that we want them to talk. Right. Yep. And we get to do our thing. Like kind of, hey, I think of this.
I don't go on forums too often because I think I'm not Willie. Willie loves them. I think they're toxic. And I don't like people hiding. If you don't like me, you don't want to, you know, that's fine. Hiding behind an avatar and just, you know, having your take. It's like somebody sent me one because people know I don't really go on them too much. And they're like, they're trying to support me. But it's like, I've seen comments of people saying, you know, I don't really mind Baschamania, but he should really talk more and let his guests just do the talk, or he should talk less and let his guests do more talking. And I'm like, if I had a conversation with somebody who had that take in person, I'd explain it to him. Like, listen, you have to have a conversation with your guests to get them to talk. Yes. If you just have 20 scripted questions, which I've done these shows where it's like, okay, first this, to this, and you don't interject number one, you're not going to build a rapport or relationship with that guest
at all,
because you could have just emailed them 10 questions and give them a Microsoft Word doc to type in the answers. But
yeah. I love the banter. I love it, just being able to talk back and forth. And I think the freedom of giving these guys that is the best part. You're doing an awesome job. Appreciate everything that you're doing. I've been, again, we started around the same time, but I started after you because, like I said, you're kind of the reason why I started to beef all my stuff. I was like, it looks really good. Like, he's got good cameras. Like, I'm dealing with a phone here. Like, I got to step my game up. I actually took a break for about a year because I couldn't afford the stuff to make it right.
Quality matters, man. I think, it's like there's a barrier to entry around having to have the right equipment and this and that. Yeah. And I don't think that should be the case, but I do think the easier your podcast is to listen to, the more people are going to appreciate it. They have good audio. If you have a good camera, I mean, I didn't do video for the first 3 years. Okay. I wanted to keep it just audio, limited resources, and I knew that once I got started, I wanted to just make sure whatever I did I could commit to. Yeah. And I know that adding video is a whole nother layer. So I didn't do video for a long time. Yeah. And then I think when I opened a Rockfin account, I started putting the video versions on there and people were liking them. Yeah. So I'm like, all right, well, we'll just start putting them on YouTube.
Why not?
I think quality definitely matters. People got to. Yeah, I hear some of these podcasts. And I'm like, man, I'm glad you're doing and trying and making things happen. But go spend $100 on a microphone because you're going to see.
Please, because I mean, if I've uploaded some of those older ones that I think they're on YouTube now. They're just under there's no video or anything like that. But if you listen to the Scott Cleaver one, and even the Gary Mapp, I had Mark Schultz, all that stuff on, all very hollow, echoey because it's through my cell phone, kind of just garbagey. And I was like, I gotta stop doing this crap, man.
I know, but you evolve. You naturally evolve as a podcast. And listen, even if the audio was perfect for the first 50 episodes, I wouldn't want to go back and listen to myself.
I can't. My wife was like, hey, you done with it? She goes, I want to listen to it. She'll turn it on. I'm like, can you turn that off? I'm still in the room.
Yeah, no, that's not allowed in my house. My wife has to put in headphones if she's listening to the podcast. Or I have to go outside, something. I don't want to.
I concur. Well, all right, we'll wrap it up. I just want to talk to you for a quick second once we get off the air here. But hey, everybody, this has been Justin Basch, man. I appreciate your time. Check out Baschmania.
Appreciate you having me on, man.
Yeah, go check out. You guys have any website questions, needs? Check out Basch Solutions. I'm guaranteeing once you see the Nittany Lion Wrestling Club website, you'll be sold.
Going live soon, new one.
That's right. So pay attention, but go check out all of his episodes, man. He's had some great guests on, but we're going to leave you with that and we're going to end this. Peace, folks. All of our episodes are brought to you by Appleton Tattoo, located at 117 South Appleton Street in Appleton, Wisconsin, right off the main drag on College Avenue. You can't miss them. I've had some work done. I have a Celtic cross that covers my back that was done by Jason. We're not done yet. Jason Winans and crew, the artists that he have there, those guys are the best in the Fox Valley. They are definitely one to go to if it's something that you've just been kind of throwing around. They'll make you feel comfortable. It's a very clean environment. Very nice crew, and very willing to get done whatever you need done when you need it done. You can message them on Facebook. I know they're on Facebook. You can give them a call at 920-604-8289 and get in touch with Jason Winans and crew at Appleton Tattoo, located again in Appleton, Wisconsin at 117 South Appleton Street, right in Appleton. Very flexible hours, great crew, clean environment again. I would not send you anywhere else except for these guys. Appleton Tattoo.